Welcome to the world of science fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy the journey. The deafening roar of failing engines filled Daniel's ears as his spacecraft plummeted through the atmosphere of an uncharted planet. His hands flew across the control panel, desperately trying to stabilize the craft, but it was no use. The ground rushed up to meet him, and everything went black. When Daniel regained consciousness, he found himself sprawled amidst the smoking wreckage of his ship. He groaned, pushing himself up and surveying the damage. The craft was a total loss, but miraculously he seemed relatively unharmed. "Well, this is just great," he muttered, brushing debris from his flight suit. Stranded on an alien world with no way to call for help. Perfect. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light of the alien world, Daniel realized he had crashed in a clearing surrounded by strange bioluminescent vegetation. The air was thick and humid, filled with unfamiliar scents. A rustling in the nearby foliage caught his attention. Daniel tensed, reaching for the blaster at his hip. "Hello?" he called out cautiously. "Is anyone there?" Suddenly a figure emerged from the underbrush. Daniel's jaw dropped as he took in the sight before him. It was a woman, or at least a female humanoid with striking blue skin that shimmered in the low light. Her features were undeniably alien, yet hauntingly beautiful. The blue-skinned woman approached Daniel slowly, her piercing eyes locked onto his. He found himself transfixed, unable to look away. "Hi there," Daniel managed to stammer out. "I come in peace." The alien tilted her head, studying him curiously. When she spoke, her voice was melodic and otherworldly. "Welcome, stranger. I am Enit, leader of the Oron. What brings you to our world?" Daniel blinked, surprised that she spoke English. "Oh, well, it wasn't exactly a planned visit. My ship crashed and he was cut off as more blue-skinned figures emerged from the forest. All of them were female, and all of them were stunningly attractive." Daniel swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of his predicament. "Ladies," he said with an awkward wave, "there wouldn't happen to be an intergalactic repair shop nearby, would there?" And its lips curved into an amused smile. "I'm afraid not, traveler, but perhaps we can be of assistance in other ways." There was something in her tone that made Daniel's pulse quicken. He cleared his throat. "Right, well, I appreciate that. I'm Daniel, by the way. Interstellar explorer extraordinaire and apparently crash test dummy." A ripple of laughter went through the group of alien women, and its eyes sparkled with interest. "An explorer, how fascinating. We so rarely get visitors to our world. The few who do come tend to flee rather quickly." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Flee? Why is that?" Enit exchanged glances with her companions. "Perhaps it would be best if we discuss this somewhere more comfortable. Will you join us in our village, Daniel?" He hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. On one hand, following a group of mysterious aliens into their lair probably wasn't the smartest move. On the other hand, well, he was already stranded on an alien planet. How much worse could things get? "Lead the way," Daniel said with a grin. As they trekked through the bioluminescent forest, Daniel found himself captivated by Enit. She moved with an otherworldly grace, her blue skin seeming to glow from within. He had to remind himself to watch his footing instead of staring. "So, Enit," he said, trying to sound casual, "what exactly did you mean about visitors fleeing?" She glanced back at him, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let's just say that our dietary needs can be rather intimidating to outsiders." Daniel nearly tripped over a root. "Dietary needs? You're not going to eat me, are you?" Enit laughed, the sound like tinkling bells. "Not in the way you're thinking, no." Before Daniel could press further, they emerged into a clearing. His eyes widened as he took in the Oron village. Structures that looked like a cross between giant flowers and bioluminescent mushrooms dotted the landscape. In the center was a large, pulsating crystal that bathed everything in a soft blue glow. "Welcome to our home," Enit said, gesturing grandly. As they entered the village, Daniel noticed something odd. "Where are all the men?" he asked. A shadow passed over Enit's face. "There are no men here. Not anymore." Daniel's hand instinctively moved towards his blaster. "What happened to them?" Enit sighed. "It's complicated. Come, let us sit, and I will explain." She led him to a circular structure that seemed to be some sort of communal gathering place. As they settled onto cushions made from spongy plant material, Daniel couldn't help but notice how the other Oron women were eyeing him hungrily. "All right," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I'm all ears. What's the deal with this place?" Enit leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Our species survives on sexual energy, Daniel. We require to live just as you require food and water. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, what now? The men of our world, they could not sustain us, and it continued. They fled, fearing we would drain them completely. And now, our people are slowly starving. Daniel's mind raced, trying to process this information. So you're saying you're like sexy energy vampires? And it tilted her head. I'm not familiar with that term, but perhaps it's an apt comparison. Right, Daniel said, running a hand through his hair. And let me guess, I look like a walking all-you-can-eat buffet to you ladies? A predatory grin spread across in its face. Oh, you have no idea. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, acutely aware of the hungry gazes fixed upon him. Look, I'm flattered, really, but I'm not sure I'm ready to be someone's dinner, no matter how attractive the diners might be. And its expression softened. We would never force you, Daniel, but perhaps we could come to some sort of arrangement. You need repairs for your ship. We need energy to survive. Surely there's a mutually beneficial solution. Daniel's mouth went dry as he considered the implications. I'll have to think about that. Init nodded. Of course. In the meantime, why don't I show you around our village? There's much to learn about our culture. As they stood, Init's hand brushed against Daniel's arm. A jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them, and he stumbled slightly. Careful, Init purred, we wouldn't want you to fall. Unless it's for me. Daniel let out a nervous laugh. Oh boy, something tells me this is going to be one hell of a cultural exchange program. As they toured the village, Daniel found himself both fascinated and bewildered by Oran customs. At one point, a group of women began performing what appeared to be an elaborate dance. Is this some kind of traditional ceremony? Daniel asked, watching the hypnotic movements. Init nodded. Yes, it's a ritual dance meant to suddenly, one of the dancers made a lunging motion toward Daniel. Acting on instinct, he dropped into a fighting stance. Whoa there, he exclaimed, I don't want any trouble. The Oran women burst into laughter. Init placed a calming hand on Daniel's arm, sending another spark of energy through him. Peace, Daniel, she said, amusement clear in her voice. It's not an attack. The dance is meant to entice potential mates. Daniel's face flushed. Oh, well, don't I feel like an idiot? Init's eyes sparkled with mirth. On the contrary, your quick reflexes are quite impressive. As the tour continued, Daniel found himself increasingly drawn to Init. Her intelligence and wit matched her physical beauty, and he couldn't help but be charmed by her playful flirtations. But as night fell and they returned to the central crystal, Init's demeanor changed. Her face grew serious as she gazed at the pulsating light. Daniel, she said softly, I haven't been entirely truthful with you. He tensed. What do you mean? Init turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. Our situation is far more dire than I let on. This crystal, it's the heart of our civilization. It's dying, Daniel, and with it, so are we. Daniel's heart sank as he took in the gravity of her words. What can I do? Init stepped closer, her hand reaching out to caress his cheek. The touch sent a surge of energy through him, leaving him breathless. You could save us, Daniel, she whispered. Your energy. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. With your help, we might have a chance at survival. Daniel swallowed hard, conflicting emotions warring within him. The rational part of his mind screamed that this was insane, that he should run while he still could. But another part of him, a part growing stronger by the moment, wanted nothing more than to stay and help these fascinating creatures, especially Init. I don't know what to say, he stammered. Init's eyes bore into his. Say you'll consider it. Say you'll stay, at least for now. Give us a chance to show you who we truly are. Daniel took a deep breath, knowing his next words could change everything. All right, he said finally. I'll stay. But no promises beyond that, okay? A brilliant smile lit up Init's face. That's all I ask. Thank you, Daniel. You have no idea what this means to us. To me. As they stood there, bathed in the glow of the fading crystal, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the precipice of something monumental. Whatever happened next, he knew his life would never be the same. So he said, attempting to lighten the mood. Any chance you ladies have some spare parts lying around? My ship isn't going to fix itself. Init laughed, the tension easing. I'm sure we can find something, although I must warn you, our technology might be a bit different from what you're used to. Daniel grinned. Hey, I'm an explorer. Different is what I live for. As they walked back to the village, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. But within it beside him, her hand occasionally brushing against his, he didn't really care. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them one flirtatious alien encounter at a time. Suddenly Annette stopped, her grip tightening on his arm. Before Daniel could react, she pulled him close, her breath hot against his ear. Her other hand moved swiftly, and he felt a shock of surprise as her fingers wrapped around his most intimate part. "Daniel," she purred, her voice a sultry whisper, "you have no idea how much I've been looking forward to this moment." He tensed, his pulse racing. "Annette," she interrupted, her hand stroking him with a deliberate, teasing motion. "Your energy is intoxicating. I can feel it coursing through you, so vibrant, so potent." Daniel's breath hitched, a mixture of arousal and anxiety flooding his senses. "I don't think you think too much," Annette murmured, her lips brushing against his earlobe. "Let go, Daniel. Let me show you the true depths of our connection." Her words, laced with both promise and threat, sent a shiver down his spine. He was caught in her spell, his body responding to her touch, despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. This was a dangerous game, one that could consume him entirely. As Annette's hand continued its maddeningly skilled caress, Daniel fought to keep his composure. In it he managed to gasp, I need to understand what you're doing to me." She chuckled softly, a sound that vibrated through him. "I'm merely sampling the energy you so generously offer. We Orans have many ways to interact, Daniel. Some are more intimate than others." Her grip tightened slightly, and Daniel bit back a moan. "And this is one of those ways?" "Indeed," she replied, her voice like velvet. "But it's just the beginning. There's so much more I want to explore with you." Daniel's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. He was drawn to Annette, to her otherworldly allure and the electric connection between them. But he also sensed the peril in surrendering completely to her desires. "I need to know what happens if I give in," he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Annette's eyes glowed with an inner light as she met his gaze. "If you give in, Daniel, you will experience pleasure beyond your wildest dreams. But remember, with great pleasure comes great responsibility. Are you ready to embrace that?" Daniel swallowed hard, his resolve wavering. I don't know. "Think about it," she whispered, her hand slowly releasing him. As the alien sun rose over the bioluminescent landscape, Daniel found himself standing before a group of expectant Oran women, their blue skins shimmering in the early morning light. Annette stood at his side, her presence both comforting and unsettling. "All right, ladies," Daniel said, clapping his hands together, "let's figure out how to juice me up without, killing me in the process." Annette raised an eyebrow. "Juice you up?" Earth expression, Daniel explained with a wink. "It means to energize or power up." A mischievous smile played across Annette's lips. "Oh, I think we can manage that." The first attempt at energy transfer was, to put it mildly, a disaster. Daniel sat cross-legged in the center of a circle formed by the Oran women, their hands outstretched towards him. "Now focus on your inner energy," Annette instructed. "Let it flow through you and out towards us." Daniel closed his eyes, concentrating hard. "Like this?" he asked, straining. Suddenly, a loud, embarrassing sound erupted from his body. Daniel's eyes flew open in mortification. "Oh God," he groaned. "That wasn't energy transfer. That was just gas." The Oran women burst into peals of laughter. Even Annette couldn't contain her amusement, her musical laughter ringing out. "Well," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, "at least we know you can produce some kind of emission." Daniel buried his face in his hands. "Kill me now." The next few days were filled with similar mishaps as Daniel and the Orans experimented with various methods of energy transfer. One attempt left him covered in a strange glowing goo that took hours to wash off. Another resulted in him accidentally projecting his thoughts, leading to some rather awkward moments when the Orans discovered his fondness for earth foods they found revolting. Through it all, Annette remained by his side, her patience seemingly endless. But Daniel couldn't help but notice the way her eyes lingered on him, or how her touch seemed to linger just a bit longer than necessary. One evening, as they sat together, Annette's eyes searched his face. "You're afraid to truly open yourself up to us, to me. Can you blame me?" Daniel asked, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to help, but I'm also trying not to, die in the process." Annette reached out, her hand gently caressing his cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through him, and he had to fight the urge to lean into it. "Daniel," she murmured, "you have to trust us. Trust me. I would never let any harm come to you." Their faces were inches apart. Daniel could feel the pull of her energy, calling to him like a siren's song. It would be so easy to give in, to let himself be consumed by her. With a surge of desperate desire, he reached out and pulled her close. Init gasped, her eyes widening in surprise before they darkened with mutual need. Her blue skin shimmered in the dim light, a living canvas of otherworldly beauty. Every inch of her was a masterpiece, from the curve of her hips to the elegant line of her legs. Daniel's hands roamed over her body, feeling the smoothness of her skin, the firmness of her muscles. He traced the contours of her thighs, feeling the strength within them, the power coiled and ready to spring. Her hips were full and inviting, a perfect contrast to the slimness of her waist. She was a vision, a goddess made flesh, and he wanted her more than he had ever wanted anything. Init's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she pressed against him. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting of the alien fruits they had shared, and she kissed him with a hunger that matched his own. Her hands were everywhere, exploring him, claiming him, making him hers. Daniel groaned as her touch sent waves of pleasure through his body. Her fingers found their way to the buttons of his shirt, deftly undoing them, and he shrugged it off, desperate to feel her against his bare skin. She responded in kind, her own clothing falling away to reveal more of her perfect form. He kissed his way down her neck, savoring the taste of her, the feel of her, the way she responded to his every touch. Init's legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him closer, and he could feel the heat of her against him. With a growl of need, he lifted her, carrying her to a soft bed of bioluminescent plants that glowed beneath them, casting their lovemaking in an ethereal light. He laid her down gently, taking a moment to drink in the sight of her spread out before him. Her eyes were dark with desire, her lips parted, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She was exquisite, every curve and contour a work of art. Her hips flared out invitingly, leading to long, shapely legs that wrapped around him, pulling him down to her. When it was over, they lay together, their bodies still trembling, their breaths mingling. Daniel held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. She was beautiful, powerful, and he knew that he had found something rare and precious in her. Init looked up at him, her eyes soft and filled with a warmth that took his breath away. "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, "for trusting me, for giving yourself to me." Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It was my pleasure," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "and I would do it again in a heartbeat." As they lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, the alien sun rose higher in the sky, casting its light over them. For the first time since he had crashed on this world, Daniel felt a sense of peace, of belonging. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he would face them with Init by his side. The next day, Daniel threw himself into repairing his ship, hoping the familiar task would clear his head. He was elbow-deep in circuitry when Init approached. "How goes the repairs?" she asked, leaning against the hull. Daniel grunted, not looking up. "Slow. Your spare parts are like trying to fix a computer with stone tools. No offense." Init chuckled. "None taken. Perhaps I could offer a distraction?" Before Daniel could respond, Init began to dance. It wasn't the formal ritual he had seen before, but something more primal, more sensual. Her body moved in ways that defied physics, blue skin shimmering with an inner light. Daniel found himself transfixed, unable to look away. He could feel the energy radiating off her, calling to something deep within him. "Init," he managed to croak out, "what are you doing?" She moved closer, her movements becoming more intimate. "Showing you what you're missing," she purred. "Don't you want to know what it feels like to truly connect with me?" Daniel's resolve was crumbling. He reached out, his hand hovering just above her skin. The air between them crackled with energy. At the last moment, he snatched his hand back. "I can't," he said, his voice ragged. "I'm sorry, but I just can't risk it." Disappointment flashed across Init's face, quickly replaced by understanding. "I see," she said softly. "Then perhaps we can connect in other ways." Over the next few weeks, as Daniel continued to work on both his ship and finding a safe method of energy transfer, he and Init spent more time together. They shared stories of their respective worlds, laughing at the absurdities of their cultural differences. "Wait," Daniel said one evening, nearly choking on the strange fruit Init had given him. "You're telling me that on your world, burping is considered a formal greeting?" Init nodded solemnly, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "Indeed, the louder and more fragrant the better." Daniel shook his head, grinning. "No wonder those other visitors ran away. They probably thought you were declaring war on them." As they laughed together, Daniel realized that his feelings for Init had grown beyond mere physical attraction. She was brilliant, funny, and kind. In another life, under different circumstances, but reality had a way of intruding on such thoughts. As the days passed, Daniel couldn't help but notice the growing desperation in the eyes of the Oran women. The crystal at the center of the village pulsed more weakly, its light dimming day by day. One morning, Enid approached him with a grim expression. "Daniel," she said, her voice tight with worry, "we're running out of time." "The crystal?" Daniel asked, dread coiling in his stomach. Enid nodded. "It's failing faster than we anticipated." "How long?" Daniel asked quietly. "Days, maybe a week at most. If we don't find a solution soon," she didn't need to finish the sentence. Daniel understood the implications all too well. "What can I do?" he asked, knowing even as he said it that he might regret the answer. "There is one thing we haven't tried," Annette said, her voice hesitant. "But it's dangerous." "For you, I mean." Daniel swallowed hard. "Tell me." Annette explained the process: a direct, unfiltered energy transfer from Daniel to the crystal itself. It would provide enough power to sustain the Orans for years to come, but the toll on Daniel's body would be severe. "You're asking me to sacrifice myself," Daniel said quietly. And its hand found his, squeezing gently. "I'm asking you to save an entire race. But I won't force you. The choice must be yours." Daniel closed his eyes, weighing the options. On one hand, he had a responsibility to help if he could. On the other, he had his own life to consider, his own dreams and aspirations. When he opened his eyes, he saw Annette watching him, her expression unreadable. "I need time to think," he said finally. Annette nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course. But please, Daniel, don't take too long. We don't have much time left." As she walked away, Daniel felt the weight of an entire civilization settling onto his shoulders. Whatever decision he made, he knew it would change not just his life, but the fate of an entire world. The sun set on the alien landscape, casting long shadows across the village. Daniel stood alone by his partially repaired ship, staring up at the unfamiliar stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, his home, his old life. It seemed a million light-years away now. He turned to look at the Oran village, at the dimming crystal that held their fate, at Enid, who stood watching him from afar, hope and fear warring in her eyes. Daniel took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had made his decision. Now he just had to find the courage to see it through. Daniel strode purposefully towards the village center, his mind made up. The Orans gathered around, their blue skin glowing with anxious anticipation. Enid stepped forward, hope shining in her eyes. "I've made my decision," Daniel announced, his voice ringing out in the tense silence. "I'm going to help you, but not in the way you expected." Enid tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a deep breath. "My ship, it's got an antimatter power core. If we can hook it up to your crystal, it should provide enough energy to sustain your people for generations." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. And its eyes widened. "But Daniel, that would mean," I know, he said softly, "I'd be stranded here. But it's a small price to pay to save an entire civilization." Enid stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. The familiar jolt of energy passed between them, stronger than ever. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Hey, there are worse places to be marooned. At least the company's attractive." Enid laughed, the sound tinged with both joy and disbelief. "You continue to surprise me, Daniel of Earth." The next few days were a flurry of activity as Daniel and the Orans worked to integrate his ship's power core with their crystal. It was a delicate process, fraught with potential disasters. "No, no, no," Daniel exclaimed, snatching a glowing cable from an overeager Oran. "You can't connect it there unless you want to blow us all to Kingdom Come." Enid raised an eyebrow. "Kingdom Come?" Daniel sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. Another Earth expression. "It means, well, let's just say it would be bad." As they worked, the tension between Daniel and Enid grew palpable. Their hands would brush as they passed tools, lingering touches that sent sparks of energy coursing through them both. Their eyes met more frequently, filled with unspoken longing. Finally, on the eve of the great energy transfer, Enid pulled Daniel aside. They stood in the shadow of his ship, the alien moons casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. "Daniel," Enid said, her voice husky, "before tomorrow, I need to know, what are we to each other?" Daniel's heart raced. He reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "I think you know, Enid, I've tried to fight it, but I'm falling for you. Hard." Enid leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "And I for you. But there's something you need to know." Daniel silenced her with a kiss. It was electric quite literally. Energy crackled between them as their lips met, a surge of power that left them both gasping. But reality intruded once again. "Tomorrow," Annette whispered, "after the transfer, we'll talk about everything then." Daniel nodded reluctantly, stepping back. "Tomorrow," he agreed. The next morning dawned bright and clear. The entire Oran population had gathered around the central crystal, which now pulsed weakly, its light barely visible in the daylight. Daniel stood before his ship, his hand hovering over the final connection. Annette stood beside him, her presence a comforting anchor. "Ready?" he asked, glancing at her. Annette nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions Daniel couldn't quite decipher. "Do it." Daniel took a deep breath and made the connection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like 1,000 thunderclaps, energy surged from the ship into the crystal. The air crackled with power, the hair on Daniel's arms standing on end. The crystal blazed to life, its glow intensifying until it was painful to look at directly. The Orans cheered, their voices rising in a joyous chorus, but something was wrong. The energy flow wasn't stopping. The crystal began to pulse erratically, cracks appearing in its surface. "It's too much." Daniel shouted over the din, "We need to shut it down." He lunged for the connection, but Annette held him back. "Wait," she cried. Suddenly the crystal exploded in a blinding flash of light. Daniel threw his arm up to shield his eyes, certain that this was the end. But when he lowered his arm, he found himself in a completely different environment. Gone was the lush, bioluminescent landscape. In its place was a sleek, futuristic laboratory. The Orans stood around him, but they looked different, more solid, somehow more real. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered, spinning around in confusion. Annette stepped forward, her expression a mixture of guilt and resolve. "I'm sorry, Daniel. It's time you knew the truth." Over the next hour, Annette explained everything. The Orans were not a dying race, but a highly advanced civilization conducting experiments on interspecies interactions. Daniel had been chosen as a test subject due to his unique combination of traits: bravery, compassion, and adaptability. "So, it was all fake?" Daniel asked, his voice hollow. "The energy transfer, the dying crystal? US?" Annette shook her head vehemently. "Not us. Never us. My feelings for you are real, Daniel. That wasn't part of the experiment." Daniel paced the lab, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know what to believe anymore. You lied to me, manipulated me, to see how you would react, and it interjected. And you exceeded our wildest expectations. Your willingness to sacrifice everything for a people you barely knew, it's remarkable." Daniel stopped pacing, fixing in it with a hard stare. "And what now? You've got your data. What happens to me?" And it took a deep breath. "That's up to you. We can return you to Earth if that's what you want. Your ship is fully repaired and upgraded. You could go home, forget this ever happened. Or..." Daniel prompted, sensing there was more. "Or," Annette said softly, "you could stay. Join us. Our civilization spans galaxies, Daniel. We could explore the universe together, and we could see where this thing between us leads." Daniel's mind reeled. Go home to Earth, to the life he knew, or embark on an adventure beyond his wildest dreams with a woman, an alien he was falling in love with. He looked at Annette, really looked at her. Despite the deception, he could see the genuine emotion in her eyes. The connection between them was real. Of that he was certain. "If I stay," he said slowly, "no more lies. No more experiments. Just you and me, figuring this out together." Annette's face lit up with joy. "I promise," she said fervently. "No more secrets." Daniel took a deep breath, weighing his options one last time. Earth, with all its familiarity and comfort, or the unknown, with all its dangers and wonders. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. "Well," he said, a grin spreading across his face, "I always did want to see the universe. But fair warning, if you think my jokes were bad before, wait until I have an entire galaxy's worth of material to work with." Annette laughed, the sound filled with relief and happiness. She stepped forward, taking his hands in hers. "I look forward to every terrible pun," she said, her eyes sparkling. As they sealed their agreement with a kiss, energy crackling between them once more, Daniel couldn't help but think that sometimes the greatest adventures come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, home isn't a place at all, but a person, even if that person happens to be a brilliant, beautiful alien from across the stars. The lab faded away around them, replaced by the vast expanse of space. Stars twinkled in the distance, entire galaxies waiting to be explored. And as Daniel and Annette set off on their cosmic journey, hand in hand, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, They would face them together, one flirtatious alien encounter at a time.